Grammar rule number 7, comparisons. Grammar rule number 7, comparisons. This is page 59 of the writing manual. So the SAT tests several different comparison issues, the first and most common of which are illogical comparisons, illogical or unclear comparisons. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that. We have to make sure that when a comparison is being made on this test, that the comparison is fair, that it is clear, that it is made between two things of the same type. Sometimes when we make comparisons, we accidentally compare things that we don't intend to compare, and the two things that we end up comparing are not things that are comparable, things that can be compared. So in example 1, this is the question that you want to think about, and you probably want to pause the video before you think about this question. You want to ask yourself in this example, what two things are compared as the sentence is written? You don't want to think about what you infer from the sentence, but what the sentence literally is comparing. So go ahead and look at example 1 and think about what things are being compared, and think about if the comparison is clear or logical or fair. I'm going to go ahead and work through this right now. So we have the nutritional value of thoroughly cooked tomatoes is actually greater than raw tomatoes. So a lot of students will read this this sentence and they will think, all right, that's pretty clear. So they're giving me that the nutritional value of one type of tomato is greater than the other type of tomato. However, that's exactly the problem, is that we have compared in this sentence the nutritional value of one type of tomato to the other type of tomato itself. These two things are comparable. We could compare thoroughly cooked tomatoes to raw tomatoes. We could say one of those is greater than the other. What we cannot do is we cannot say the nutritional value of this first type of tomato is greater than this type of tomato. What we are saying literally in this sentence is that the nutritional value is greater than raw tomatoes. We cannot compare nutritional value to raw tomatoes. So literally the two things that are being compared here are nutritional value of one type of tomato that is being compared to, that is greater than the other type of tomatoes. You cannot compare these two things. They are not fairly compared. The way that we would fix this, we'll get to in 1 second, but let's talk about the tip-off clue for this error first. The tip-off clue is basically anytime you see a comparison being made, and the most frequent and probably easiest way to know that a comparison is being made is if you see ER words or more, and I'm going to put that in quotes, followed, that's how you spell followed by the word than. Anytime you see an ER word, and here's a good example of an ER word, like greater, followed by than, or more followed by than, like if you see more intelligent than, okay, so ER words or more followed by than, that is your tip-off clue that comparisons may be being tested, that you might have a comparison error in the sentence. Sorry, I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. So the rule is ensure that the comparison is fair / logical, or that it is between two things of the same type. That's what you need to do. When you see an ER word or more followed by than, just look at the two things that are being compared and make sure those two things are of the same type. If they are, you've got a perfectly fine comparison. If they're not, you've got an illogical comparison. So how would we change example 1 up above to make it clear? Well, one way that we could do it is we could just repeat the missing noun. Remember, we were comparing nutritional value of one type of tomato to the other type of tomato. So what we could do is we could take this noun, nutritional value, and we could just insert it in front of raw tomatoes. That's what example 1a is all about here. We have now the nutritional value of thoroughly cooked tomatoes is greater than, there's our comparison tip-off clue, is greater than the nutritional value of, and then we have raw tomatoes. So now we have this alignment between nutritional value of one type of tomato to the nutritional value of the other type of tomato. So that would be a perfectly fine fix. However, there is a much more common, much more elegant fix that ETS will tend to prefer on this test, and that is to use a pronoun like that or those plus a preposition, which very frequently ends up being of. The way that would work in example 1b, we would have, again, the nutritional value of, and then we have these types of tomatoes, thoroughly cooked tomatoes. And then remember, the problem here is that we just have raw tomatoes. So what we would need to insert here before raw tomatoes is the pronoun that, and that would be referring back to nutritional value. It's just a pronoun replacing nutritional value, that noun, and of. And that of sort of is, it's the same as or parallel with this of here. So the whole sentence would be the nutritional value of thoroughly cooked tomatoes is actually greater than that, the nutritional value, of raw tomatoes. This fix is preferred because it's a little bit less redundant, it's a little bit briefer, it's just a little bit more elegant than this clunky repetition of the noun in the first half of the comparison. So in examples 2 and 3, you're going to do them on your own right now. Remember what you're doing. You are looking for the comparison tip-off clue. You might even want to circle the comparison tip-off clue. So you're looking for the comparison tip-off clue. You are then looking to see what two things are being compared. You are then going to ask yourself if those things are fairly or logically compared. And if they are, great. If not, you need to make a correction. Go ahead and do examples 2 and 3 on your own right now. So in example 2, we have got the seats in the new theater are more comfortable and recline farther than the old theater. Well, if we read this comparison very literally, and by the way, there, and there are your comparison tip-off clues. You've got a more, you've got an ER word, and you've got a than. That was the tip-off clue that we discussed above. So if you read this very literally, you have the seats in, and then you have the new theater, and those are more comfortable and recline farther than the old theater. So this sentence is saying that the seats in the new theater recline farther than the old theater, as if the old theater like reclines, which is sort of weird. You would think that would be a very dangerous situation if the theater was reclining. I would get out of that theater immediately. But anyway, to fix this error, what we would do is say the seats in the new theater are more comfortable and recline farther than the seats in the old theater. But again, remember our more elegant, our briefer change, we can say than those in the old theater. Now, notice I used a that in this previous example. I'm using a those in this example. We use that to refer to a singular noun and those to refer to a plural noun. And in this case, I have this seats, which is plural. So I need to replace seats in the second half of the conjunction with a plural pronoun those, not a singular pronoun that. So the seats in the new theater are more comfortable and recline farther than the seats in or those in the old theater. That is example 2. Example 3, we have Lola's entree, both prettier and tastier than her competitor, nevertheless failed to win the top prize. So here we have our tip-off clues, ER words, and than. Those words indicate that we have a comparison being made. Now, what things are being compared here? We have Lola's entree being compared to her competitor. This sentence is literally saying that Lola's entree was prettier than her competitor, and Lola's entree was tastier than her competitor. I really hope that nobody was chowing down on her competitor and saying that her competitor was not tasty. because at least if they're going to chow down on her competitor, they should say that she's kind of tasty. But anyway, the bottom line is that's a really sort of sick sentence. Anyway, we have a unfair or unclear comparison. We cannot compare the entree that one of the competitors cooked to the other competitor herself. What we would need to do here is say Lola's entree was prettier and tastier than the entree of, or we can use that more elegant fix, that of her competitor. Lola's entree was prettier and tastier than the entree of her competitor. Now we have a clear comparison. There are some other fixes that you can use. For instance, some students will say, what if I wanted to say Lola's entree was prettier and tastier than her competitor's entree? You could do that as well. ETS does not tend to use that fix all that often. And again, this that of fix is a little bit more formal. So that is your first comparison issue, unclear or illogical comparisons. Make sure your comparisons are clear, made between things that are fairly compared. Other illogical comparison tip-off clues, this is actually the same rule, but all I'm doing here is adding a few more tip-off clues. So remember, we said that ER words or more followed by than, that's the primary tip-off clue for the rule we just discussed. That's the primary tip-off clue. However, there are many other phrases, words that can indicate that a comparison is afoot. So for instance, if we see something like as ... as, we know that a comparison is being made. I am as intelligent as my brother. That's not true. I'm vastly more intelligent than my brother. Just kidding, brother. Just kidding. As would indicate that a comparison is being tested. Differ from, okay, that would indicate that a comparison is being tested. Similar to would indicate that a comparison is being tested. Even something like prefer something to something else, that would indicate that a comparison is being tested. And then compared with / to, that would also indicate a comparison is being tested. So again, there are many words and phrases that might indicate a comparison issue should be examined or investigated. The ER words or more followed by then, that's your primary, and then you've got all of these other ones that you need to look out for as well. Look at examples 1, 2, and 3. You want to do a couple things here. You might want to circle your comparison tip-off clues. So there's the differ from. That would be your tip-off clue in number 1. So circle your comparison tip-off clues and then see if the comparison is clear or fair. If it is not, make the appropriate correction. In example 1, we have Paul was disappointed that his feelings differ dramatically from most of his friends. So what we are literally comparing here is our feelings to friends. The feelings were different from friends. That doesn't make any sense because we can't really compare feelings to friends. We can compare friends to friends. We can compare feelings to feelings. And indeed, that's what we meant to do in writing this sentence. Paul was disappointed that his feelings differ dramatically from those of, or the feelings of, most of his friends. We need to compare feelings to feelings, not feelings to friends. Example 2, while not as polished as her classmates, Tracy's writing has shown consistent improvement over the last 3 assignments. So here's our comparison tip-off clue. We have as. So we need to ask ourselves what in this sentence is not as polished as what. And this one's, it's moved around a little bit, but we see Tracy's writing not as polished as her classmates. So what we are doing here is comparing the polishedness of Tracy's writing to the polishedness of her classmates. I know polishedness is not a word. Just bear with me here. You get the point that I'm trying to make, I think, hopefully. So again, we cannot say that Tracy's writing was as polished as her classmates unless indeed her classmates have been recently polished and we are really trying to compare Tracy's writing to how polished her classmates are. Most likely what the author of this sentence intended to write was that Tracy's writing was not as polished as the writing of her classmates, or the more elegant fix, that of her classmates. So again, we had an unclear comparison there, an illogical comparison that needs to be changed. In example 3, many studies have sought to compare the cost of driving electric vehicles with gasoline-powered vehicles. So we have compare something with something. So there's our comparative tip-off clue, our comparison tip-off clue. Now, what two things are being compared? We are comparing the cost of, and then we have driving electric vehicles, and then in this second half, we just have gasoline-powered vehicles. Can we compare the costs of driving electric vehicles to the gasoline-powered vehicles themselves? No, that's not a fair comparison. We can't compare costs to a vehicle. That is not a fair comparison. So what we would need to do is compare costs to costs, or just vehicles to vehicles. In this case, what we're going to do is we are going to insert those of here, and now that those will refer back to costs. So the sentence becomes, many studies have sought to compare the costs of driving electric vehicles with the costs, or those, of gasoline-powered vehicles. Those are your unclear or illogical comparison tip-offs and examples. Make sure you know that well. It is a very common error that shows up on the SAT. One more note on example 3. Technically, to make this completely parallel, you probably also want to throw in a driving here before gasoline-powered vehicles, so that you have the costs of driving parallel to those of driving gasoline-powered vehicles. To be perfectly clear and parallel, technically you should have a driving in there. The main issue is spotting that unclear comparison, but you probably want to throw that driving in there as well. On to the next comparison issue. We have ER versus EST comparisons. ER versus EST comparisons. This is just another comparison issue that can show up on the test. The tip-off clue for this guy is ER words or more. Sorry, that really should say ER words. My fault. Let's get that in there. ER words / more, or EST words / most. So if you see ER words or more, or EST words or most, they may be testing this comparison issue, the ER versus EST comparison issue. And what is this issue? It is that we use ER words or more when comparing only two things, and we use EST or most when comparing 3 or more things. So you might even want to add to your tip-off clue, you might want to add and number, and a number in the sentence. So if you were to see something like greater in a sentence, and somewhere else you were to see like 4 people, it is possible that this greater will have to be changed to greatest, because when we are comparing 4 people, we use EST words, not ER words. Take a look at examples 4, 5, and 6, and you will see what this rule is all about. Go ahead and do those on your own right now. So in example 4, we have, of the more than 50 entries in the writing contest, Greta's work was declared more creative by the panel of judges. So there's the ER word or more. There's our tip-off clue right there. And now what we need to do is we need to say, all right, well, if Greta's work was declared more creative, we should only be comparing two things, because when we use a more or an ER word, we are comparing two things. However, there were more than 50 entries in this writing contest. So we do not want to use an ER word or more. We want to use an EST word or most. So of the more than 50 entries, we are comparing more than 50 entries. Greta's work is declared most creative by the panel of judges. Number 5 of the 2 albums the band released last year, this one has been the most successful. Well, again, here's our tip-off clue right here. We have an EST word, or in this case, most. We need to make sure that the comparison is being made between 3 or more people or things. However, right here is the number in the sentence. There was a number in that sentence. Here's a number in the sentence. Only 2 things are being compared. We do not use EST or most. When 2 things are being compared, we use ER words, or in this case, more. So of the 2 albums the band released last year, this one has been the more successful. Now, a lot of students will say that you need album at the end of the sentence. You need to say the more successful album. You cannot just end with the more successful. That is not correct. You do not need to repeat the noun at the end of the sentence. It is perfectly fine to end the sentence with the more successful and then the period. In example 6, nearly a foot in length when it is fully grown, the Amazonian centipede is the much larger of all centipede species in existence today. So here's our tip-off clue. There's the ER word. Now, what we've got in this sentence is a little bit trickier than the previous 2 sentences, because we do not have a number of centipede species in existence. They don't tell us how many centipede species are in existence today. However, we can probably assume that it's more than 2 centipede species. Most likely there are more than 2 centipede species. And in fact, there are roughly 8,000 species of centipede in the world. At least that's according to Wikipedia. Whether you trust Wikipedia or not, it's up to you. But yeah, that's a quick tidbit of the day. 8,000 centipede species. That will be on your next quiz, so make sure you know it. The centipede is the much larger of all centipede species in existence today. Since there are 8,000 centipede species in existence, this needs to be an EST word, because we are comparing way more than just 2 things. We use ER only for comparisons of 2 things, EST or most for comparisons of 3 or more, and indeed there are more than 2 centipede species in existence. Keep in mind, you didn't need to know that number 8,000. That was completely irrelevant. You just need to infer that there are more than 2 centipede species in existence. Now, some other comparison issues. These issues do not show up very often, but if you are going for a very high score on the writing test, you're going to want to know about these issues. Do not combine more with an ER word. You might even want to add as well or most with an EST word. Remember that when you put an ER on a word, when I go from smart to smarter, well, what does smarter mean? It means more smart. So if you say more smarter, you are saying more smart, more smart. That is obviously redundant and really weird. So don't do that. Don't put, do not put more/most in front of ER/EST words. Never want to do that. So in example 7, read it all the way through, press pause, try it on your own. Okay, so example 7, this one should be fairly straightforward. Anita wondered how she could be any more busier. Finals week provided an answer. We have combined a more with an ER word. That is not correct. That is redundant. So what we can do is we can probably just get rid of the more. Anita wondered how she could be any busier. Finals week provided an answer. So we can just get rid of the more, and then we lose that redundancy. And then the last comparison issue that you might need to know about deals with this issue of being part of a group. So take a look at examples 8 and 9. And although these sentences are very, very similar, in fact, they only have a one-word difference, this US versus this European. That's the only difference in these two sentences. And yet, one of these sentences is perfectly correct as written, and one of the sentences is not correct as written. Take a look at them. Take a couple seconds. See if you can figure out why one of these is correct and one of them is not correct. So in example 8, here's what we've got. We've got LA. I'm gonna actually diagram this out. We've got LA freeways, and they are greater than, they are more congested than the entire set of US cities. Now remember that in the set of US cities, we have, let's say, NYC, we have New York. Let's say we have the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. Let's say we have, let's do a southern city like Atlanta. Let's do, I don't know, what's another cool city? How about Little Rock, Arkansas? Everybody knows that Little Rock is like the most amazing city in the entire country. Okay, let's move on to LA. Let's put LA in there. So remember, LA is one of the, I apologize to those of you who might live in Little Rock. I'm sure Little Rock is a beautiful, beautiful city. So LA is one of our US cities. So we can see in this diagram what we're ending up doing is we are comparing LA to itself. We are saying that LA's freeways are greater than any US city, which is the same thing, or which implies that LA freeways are greater than LA freeways. And that is not logical. That is not a logical comparison. It's impossible for LA freeways to be more congested than LA freeways. So what we would need to do to fix number 8, example 8, is the incorrect sentence. What we would need to do is we would need to differentiate Los Angeles from all of the other US cities. So we would need to say the freeways in Los Angeles are more congested than those in any other US city. And what that other does is it removes LA from our set of US cities, and now we just have the other US cities, not including LA. Example 9 is perfectly fine because Los Angeles is not a member of the set of European cities, so we can say that the freeways in Los Angeles are more congested than those in any European city, because that comparison would be perfectly clear, as once again LA is not in the set of European cities. I can name some European cities, I'm just not writing them down right now to save some time. Like Paris, that's a European city. Examples 10 and 11, go ahead and do those on your own. London, that's a European city. Go ahead and do examples 10 and 11 on your own right now. Press pause on the video. In example 10, we have the protective instinct of the Rottweiler is as strong as that of any dog, and as such makes the breed extremely adept at guarding blah blah blah. So we have protective instinct. As is our tip-off clue. We have that of, the that referring back to protective instinct. So that's all good. Protective instinct of the Rottweiler is as strong as protective instinct of any dog. The problem is that the Rottweiler is a dog. And if we say that the protective instinct of that dog is as strong as that of any dog, that doesn't make any sense. We're comparing the Rottweiler dog to all dogs, and Rottweiler dog is part of the set of all dogs. So what we need to do is, once again, we need to insert the other here. The Rottweiler's protective instinct is as strong as that of any other dog. So yeah, that was a example of comparing a group member to the group that it is a part of, and we cannot do that unless we use the word other. In example 11, Wesley swears that his cat's agility is superior to any dog, even if his cat cannot outrun the small Chihuahua next door. So that sentence is perfectly fine, right? Because we have a cat being compared to, superior to. That's another comparison tip-off clue, by the way, that we didn't list before. The cat's agility is superior to any dog. So it's a cat being compared to a dog, so we do not need other in this sentence. So this sentence is perfectly fine. I hope you didn't say it was perfectly fine, because it's not. We do have a problem in this sentence. I tricked you guys on this one. I apologize for that. But Wesley swears that his cat's agility is superior to any dog. We are comparing agility to a dog. You cannot say that agility is superior to a dog. You can say that his cat's agility is superior to that of any dog. But you cannot say that agility is superior to a dog. So I threw in another unclear or illogical comparison error here. This is not a part of the group error, but an unclear or illogical comparison error. Hopefully you caught that. If you didn't, make sure you're looking for those unclear or illogical comparisons. That is it for comparisons. So remember, our big rule when we're talking about comparisons, or when we spot a comparison, our big rule is making sure the comparison is logical or fair or clear. The second biggest rule will be determining if the comparison is between two people or things, or three or more people or things, and then appropriately using an ER versus an EST word respectively. And then we have these other little comparison issues. Don't be redundant. Don't put a more or an EST in front of, a more or most in front of an ER or EST word. And make sure that if you spot a comparison between something and a group that something is part of, you might need to use the word other to distinguish that thing from the other members of the group, so that you don't unintentionally compare the thing to itself. And that is all for comparisons.